This is Derrick Broze. This is Derrick Broze of the Conscious Resistance. I'm here in Standing Rock.
That man is wanted in 5 different countries: Chile, Argentina, Brazil.
We've been fighting a long time. We've all lost so very much. So many loved ones gone.
Don't you fucking tease that horse!
You are not alone. There are pockets of resistance all around the planet. We are at the brink. Above all, stay alive. You have no idea how important you are. If you're listening to this, you are the resistance.
Hey everyone, this is Derrick Broze of the Conscious Resistance Network, and today I'm bringing you back a returning guest, somebody that I've been speaking to for going on a decade now. For some of my newer audience, as the channel's grown, you might not be aware that some of my early activism in journalism was focused on 9/11 Truth, and I first met Richard back in New York in 2010 or 2011 at 9/11 Truth events, and we have interviews on the website going back from February 2014, September 2014, September 2017. So we've been collaborating together for a number of issues related to 9/11 over the years. So thank you, Richard, for coming back and talking with us.
Thanks, Derek, and hi, everybody.
Let's go ahead. I mean, we're going to just recap some things that we've talked about previously. I do recommend everybody checking out our previous interviews where Richard goes more into detail about the official story that we're told of 9/11 and the work done by architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, which Richard represents. Today, though, we're going to be sort of bringing things up to speed for what we have going on with the 19th anniversary of 9/11 as we approach that. And this will actually be airing live in Houston on 9/11, the 19th anniversary. And so we really want to make sure that people get some vital information about what's going on 19 years after the fact and why there are still questions about 9/11. But let's start with telling everybody, Richard, about this upcoming online conference that you have planned.
Yeah, pretty exciting. We have September 11th, 12th, and 13th, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern, and then 3 p.m. Eastern on Saturday, and then back to 6 p.m. Eastern on Sunday. This is an online conference that's free for everybody. We're bringing some real special speakers to the fore. We'll be updating everybody on the success we've been having and the efforts we're making toward getting a real investigation. We'll have the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry talking about their new efforts to get into the evidence into the court system. And they're going after the Anthrax, submitting that to a special grand jury as well. All that evidence, which happened on 9/11, many people don't even remember or perhaps never knew about that. We have James Corbett coming to finish off on Sunday. The Library of Alexandria is on fire. That's the historical example of mass censorship. And it goes on, and he'll be talking about that. And then we have John Whitehead of the Rutherford Institute, who will be discussing his constitutional attorney, Battlefield America. We also have Danielle Ganser, who's an expert on false flag operations and the credible manipulation and abuse of the minds of the people of this world subsequent to 9/11. So that happens on Sunday. Going back to Friday, there's a gentleman named Matt Campbell who's submitting a petition to the court system in the UK for a new inquest into his brother's death, who was murdered in the towers on 9/11, the North Tower, and in the explosive demolition of those towers. So we'll be having him come on and talk about that effort, for which during this whole conference we'll be raising funds for his legal fees. We've been on a $100,000 fundraising campaign, all of which goes to the attorneys. So we're pretty excited to be able to hopefully complete that effort financially, so we can really begin this work in earnest in the UK. We also have the request for correction, which we've submitted to NIST, which we're going to be talking about today. And that we'll be talking about in detail with Ted Walter, Tony Zambodi, engineer, and attorney Mick Harrison. We open up on Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern with Dylan Avery, creator of Loose Change 9/11. He's since won awards for his films. Many people don't know. Black and Blue, a story about police abuse in New York. And he's done really well. Well, he's made a new film for us called Seven. And this is about World Trade Center 7, of course, the third skyscraper that collapsed on 9/11. Many people may not be aware of it. Most architects and engineers are completely unaware of it. This 47-story skyscraper on the afternoon of 9/11, just after witnesses hear explosions, it just drops like a rock straight down uniformly, symmetrically into its own footprint, the exact manner of a classic controlled demolition. Well, that only happens with classic controlled demolitions. In this case, not very classic because there's the evidence of incendiaries, in this case, being used. But this film features Leroy Halsey, one of the top forensic structural engineers in the country. And he's done a finite element analysis, which we're going to be discussing today as well, which pulls the rug out from underneath the NIST official narrative that fire brought this building down. Well, fires have never brought down a skyscraper, ever, especially in the manner of a classic controlled demolition. It just would never happen. So we'll go into some detail about that as well. And what I'm most excited about is bringing back to the platform together three pioneers in the 9/11 truth movement, David Ray Griffin and Stephen Jones and Niels Harrit. Their work has been absolutely instrumental for all of us in the 9/11 truth movement. David Ray Griffin's written 14 books on 9/11 truth. Stephen Jones came out with the early evidence of extreme temperatures, which jet fuel fires cannot possibly account for, and which is direct evidence of incendiaries. And then Niels Harrit, of course, the chief author of the 25-page peer-reviewed paper documenting the finding of nanothermite in the World Trade Center dust, active thermitic materials, all the dust samples that they had. So this is pretty exciting, Derrick.
Yeah, I agree, Richard. I mean, that sounds like for me, somebody who's been keeping up with 9/11 for, as I said, a decade now, it sounds like a good event to attend, and especially I think for people who maybe are completely new to, because as you know, this is something you're involved with on the day-to-day basis, Richard. There's still people who are just now starting to question 9/11, who are just coming around to these facts, and a lot of things going on in the world are causing people to just question the world in general, question government in general, and at some point they find themselves towards the topic of 9/11. They decide to watch, Loose Change, or watch some of the presentations you've given, or some presentations from David Ray Griffin, or read some of his books, or they go down this 9/11 rabbit hole, as it were, and start to ask these questions. So I really do recommend everybody who, whether you've been involved with 9/11 since 2002, or you've just started to question these things, definitely check out the event this weekend, starting Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And what day is David Ray Griffin, Stephen Jones, and Niels Harrit? What day are they going to be speaking?
We call that Science Saturday, and they'll be speaking specifically at 5 p.m. Eastern.
Okay, great. Excuse me. Well, I want to talk before we move on to the NIST topic, because I really want to get into that. You mentioned as part of the event that there was going to be new efforts to find out about the Anthrax attacks to 9/11. Is there any more you could add towards that as far as what they might specifically be looking for?
Well, I'm sworn to secrecy, and I'm looking forward to hearing a lot of the information, a lot of it for the first time, at 8:15 on Friday night, September 11th, Eastern. We know that anthrax was...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, anybody who's started to look into anthrax, I think, has seen that there are also questions in the same way that there's questions about the building's collapse, and it's just the 9/11 operation, if you want to call it that, has questions from every angle. And even somebody like yourself, Richard, who I think has done a great job of sticking to what your credentialed background is in, which is in architecture, but you can also see whether you choose to dedicate your time to them or not is another story, but you can also see that there are other pieces of the story that don't add up. And I think that's what many people have come to realize. You guys have done a great job in helping people see that about the World Trade Towers, as well as, of course, Building 7, which many people are still unaware to this day. But I think no matter which way you're looking at it, we're 19 years after the fact. We're coming on 2 decades, and the questions haven't ceased. Despite what the debunkers say, the questions haven't been answered in any sort of, I would say, satisfactory fashion. And to that point, you and Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth have been trying to, or you did successfully file an appeal to NIST about Building 7 and about the collapse. And this appeal was from family members as well as 88 architects and structural engineers. Could you tell us a little bit about that experience and what the end result was recently?
Yeah, this is called a request for correction. We submitted one in 2007, a year after I got hit over the head with a 2x4, having heard David Ray Griffin on the radio for the first time, becoming aware that there was a third tower that collapsed on 9/11, and that there was all of this incredible, explosive evidence about the Twin Towers. So that was from several family members and architects as well, and they have a way of writing back to you and giving you the biggest bunch of BS. So what we did this time, 10 years later, 15 years later, 14 years later, 13 years later. Anyway, this is a 110-page request for correction, very, very carefully written by Ted Walter on our team. And it highlights and exposes 8 key vulnerabilities that NIST had in their fraudulent document on the final report of World Trade Center 7. And those 8 key vulnerabilities that we focused on were, one, the fact that, well, their theory here is that these fires caused expansion of long span beams to push a girder off of its seat on this column 79, and then floor 13 falls on 12 and 12 on 10, and so on for 9 floors, leaving column 79 in the northeast section of the building unbraced. So it buckles, and that causes instability all the way up to the penthouse on top, and then over to the west side in this football field size building. So all of that happens in less than, or just slightly more than 6 seconds, by the way. So it's absolutely incredible, this elaborate initiation of collapse theory that they have, none of which, no part of it could be true for a whole variety of reasons, which we get into in our webinar on this subject, which I encourage your listeners to also look at, which is called 9/11, An Architect's Guide, a 3-part series. Part 1 is on World Trade Center Building 7. That's free on YouTube to watch. But in the request for correction, we focus on the fact that even if those beams were to expand and pushed this girder, the girder would have expanded also linearly. And so it then would have expanded into the column, being trapped by the side plate, which was added to the column to reinforce it. And so it could never have been pushed off. And so what does NIST do in their response? They simply say, basically they say our model is correct and your request for correction is denied. They do that in so many words. It's absolutely egregious. They don't even admit the basic points that side plate would have been trapped because of the heat. They completely ignore that point. So we're for that first item and the following 8 items, we are going to be submitting an appeal to their overall denial of all of these 8 points. The next one was the thermal expansion of yet another beam, which they say helped push the girder off of its seat, but it was braced by structural components that, they call them outriggers, that would have stabilized that beam. But they ignore them. So they say that beam actually buckled. Next point, they completely ignore other key structural elements like web stiffeners, which would have kept the flange from folding on the bottom of girder 79. You see, they say the girder only had to be pushed halfway off of its seat on this column. But because that stiffener was there in reality, and we know that because of the shop drawings show it to be, it would have kept the flange from folding after the beam was pushed halfway off of its seat. So it indeed would have had to have been pushed all the way off of its 12-inch long seat on that column 79. So they ignore the key points there as well. They also ignore the fact that this was a global collapse, and that as such, obviously, it looks exactly like a controlled demolition, which the whole building is coming down at once, absent the penthouse, which falls 6 seconds earlier. So the Halsey study, which is used throughout this request for correction as backup, the Halsey study points out that indeed all 80 columns would have to have been removed at once in order for this building to fall as fast as it does, which is free fall, by the way, for a third of its 7-second fall. Therefore, that has to happen within a second, all those columns within each, the interior followed by the exterior. And that means that none of those 80 columns gave any resistance to this building. That's what free fall means. The columns aren't giving resistance because the building is falling at free fall, which means no resistance, free fall. So they can't have it both ways. And so they're trying to get their way all around here. They've also danced their way around the seismic data, which we have shown clearly, and which they actually admit in their original report, that the seismic event that occurs near the time of the collapse of Building 7 actually occurs 10 seconds before the overall collapse of the building. And their response to this early on was that, well, this is due to the interior of the building collapsing first. Well, if the interior was collapsing first, then we would see massive exterior deformation of the structural steel system and breaking up of granite panels and windows on an incredible scale, because these beams don't just fall off on the inside, leaving the exterior undeformed. They're very rigidly tied. This is a moment-resisting steel frame structure. So they completely ignore that, as they ignore the numerous eyewitnesses and audio evidence of explosions, because they had earlier said, well, if there were controlled demolition in this building capable of destroying column 79, you would have heard of a 130 decibel sound of explosions, and you'd hear it through Manhattan. Well, there are plenty of witnesses, and they don't interview any of them, but we did, that talk about sounds of explosions. And nevertheless, the reason they might not have used in this controlled demolition, by the way, typical high energy explosives like C4 and RDX, well, those do provide louder bangs. But thermite, for which we found immense evidence, and which we also included in this request for correction, has a much softer audio signature, but it produces a lot of molten iron in the process. That's what thermite does at 4,000 degrees, so extreme temperatures, which comprise one of the uh, the other 8 key frauds on the part of NIST. You see, they took over the investigation from FEMA in 2002. Well, FEMA had an Appendix C in their building performance assessment report that was a metallurgical examination of the steel. What did they find? They found hot temperature corrosion attack on the steel, molten iron invading the grain boundaries of the steel, hot sulfur. Where did the sulfur come from in this attack? Well, all this evidence is direct evidence of thermite. And one of the FEMA engineers said that the ends of the beams appear to have been partly evaporated. Well, that was not included in the final report either. None of this was. It's completely omitted. And so they found a way to talk themselves out of responding effectively to all 8 of these, including that one. So we'll be appealing to the next level outside of NIST, the Office of the Inspector General. Well, that's the next level, actually. The first level is the very head of NIST, a gentleman named Olfkamp or something like that. But then we're probably going to have to sue them as well. So it's going all the way to the top there.
That's what I was curious of. I was going to ask next if this appeal is rejected, which based on history and dealing with NIST, it's probably to be expected. If there were, plans to go further with legal actions, which you said yes to that. And I appreciate all the effort and the time and, of course, the funds that go into making these efforts that yourself and other people on the team of architects and engineers make to do this, because really without trying these sort of bureaucratic efforts to hold the government accountable, right? To hold them to their own standards, which you have seen yourself firsthand. They often do not even live up to those standards. And the average American maybe doesn't even know what NIST is, maybe has no idea about this appeal process. And, how have you, and this I guess is maybe more of a personal question, how have you and architects and engineers struggled with and dealt with the efforts to reach more people, to get people to understand this? Because as you know, some of this information can be kind of in the weeds to some people. It gets, it gets tedious, but it's the details that really matter when it comes to 9/11. But sometimes I feel like many people have already moved on. Either they accept the official story or they accept that, yeah, we were lied to, but they don't have much faith in anything ever happening to it. And I know that that's something you're still chipping away from. So how do you feel about that?
Chipping away is the right word. We don't make huge gains very often. And we're eroding the trust that the public, the media, and members of the government, hopefully, whom we're also addressing every year in Washington, D.C., have less and less trust about what they have heard, what they've been told. A lot of people are waking up to the manipulation that's going on currently with regard to COVID-19 and the response from government about that. So we hope people will begin to realize, as they find that they've been lied to, that we are that there are many other things that they have to look at very carefully, issues such as 9/11. And we have presentations that are 10 minutes long on YouTube. Just Google World Trade Center 7 Solving the Mystery with Ed Asner. It can be not tedious. I have a 4-hour presentation I can give on this subject in 3 parts. The webinar, 9/11 An Architect's Guide. We have a 1.5-hour landmark documentary, 9/11 Explosive Evidence, Experts Speak Out. And it's less tedious because we have very interesting and short excerpts from 40 high-rise architects, structural engineers, metallurgists, chemists, physicists, controlled demolition experts, all laying out this evidence in a relatively easy way to comprehend it. And we have small brochures that people can hand out on the street or hand to their VIPs or friends and colleagues.
I don't mean tedious in a sense that you guys haven't done a great effort. I just know that sometimes the topic can be overwhelming, but you're right. You do have such a great range of material that has been compiled for going on 15 years now. And I think that this is such a topic that, you were talking with James Corbett recently. James has great documentaries on the topic, looking at the financial side of things from, the different players. The research is available, from what you guys have done, from what James, others, myself, many people who've been out there on the streets of 9/11, taking some of your material, passing it out to people, having those conversations. And I do think that 9/11 is something that more people question. I can say for sure, Richard, that when we first met, I feel like from that time till now, there's more questioning 9/11 than there were, even though there might not be as many people in the streets as there used to, say, on the anniversary of 9/11, especially this year with COVID. There are still more and more people on the internet and out here in the real world that are questioning things, and particularly questioning 9/11. So I really appreciate everything that you guys have done and the efforts to do the NIST appeal. I also want to make one quick reference. I know it's not something that you're most familiar with, but I do want everybody who's listening to check out on the AE911truth.org website. They have a great report called From the Reporter's Own Mouth, how 36 reporters brought us the Twin Towers explosive demolition, because Richard was referencing the explosions. You may have seen some of these clips of firefighters and journalists, and they do a great job of compiling all this testimony from various people who have who reported on 9/11 of either eyewitness reports of witnessing explosions or hearing it directly, or secondary sources and things of that sort. Because I think that's really important and crucial to pointing just to another way to poke holes in the official story, because the official story completely ignores the existence of these explosions.
Yeah, that was the whole working theory the first day there, and maybe the second day, until it all got turned around. There were so many reports of bombs in the buildings, and there were explosions in Building 7 too, which wasn't even hit by an airplane. That were, and this was in the late morning, when before the towers had even come down, but after the planes had hit. Barry Jennings was in there with from the housing department, and Michael Hess, Mayor Giuliani's attorney. They got trapped in that building, and they were experiencing all these explosions inside the building, which destroyed the lobby and destroyed the stairs they were using to try to get back down out of the building, because they hadn't realized that it had been evacuated after the planes hit the towers, but before the towers came down. So many reporters were talking about the working theory of the FBI, that it was bombs placed in the building, not the fires, that brought the towers down.
That, I think, we've kind of talked about this in the past, so I don't want to rehash it, but the fire theory, from what you're showing with the NIST appeal, what you've shown in previous reports, and the probably at this point dozens of documentaries that you guys have produced at this point, and reports and presentations, it is without a doubt certain that fire did not bring down Building 7 and the Twin Towers. And as you mentioned briefly, and I'd like you to sort of recap this, because I've written about it when it first started, the Alaska Fairbanks study with Dr. Leroy Holsey that you mentioned earlier, and his work now showing in the form of a study from a credentials engineer that the theory of fire and thermal expansion, that just doesn't add up. I mean, we sort of already knew this, but now we have the references that we need in order to get that information further. So talk a little bit about that. I know the process started, I think, in 2016 with this study, and it maybe even took longer than originally planned, because Dr. Holsey was doing a very kind of thorough job before releasing his his reports. And here we are now with that information being out there. Talk a little bit about that process and the response that you guys have seen since then.
Yes, very, very interesting 130-page document that he's produced now. He was approached by a supporter of ours and asked him, would you look at this? I mean, here's a for the first time ever, a fire alone is bringing down a high-rise building. I mean, this is completely unprecedented. If this is true, then we have hundreds of buildings throughout the world similarly designed that are in jeopardy, perhaps, of fire doing the same thing to them. That was the motivating factor that turned Dr. Halsey around. He was the chairman of the Department of Civil Engineering and Environmental Engineering there at University of Alaska in Fairbanks. His team of PhD researchers worked on this very hard, and they concluded that, and they used the same assumptions that NIST used, even though they found them to be wrong. A lot of very key assumptions: fire temperatures, too hot, the structural components missing that we talked about already, shear studs that NIST omitted from the top of the girder, which would have tied it to the concrete slab up above, which would have kept it from sliding anywhere. NIST just completely omitted those shear studs. Well, they used all the same features, and they didn't find any collapse. Finally, in fact, they found that the whole movement would have been the other way, toward the exterior, toward the east, as a result of the expansion by fire. The beam wouldn't even have moved in the direction that NIST said it was. This is exposing the most basic flaws and these assumptions, and hence fraud, because their conclusions on the part of NIST shows a progressive collapse, when in fact what really happens is A, no collapse, but B, if we take out columns 79, 80, and 81, what happens? Let's say NIST was right for some reason. Well, the building begins to tip over. And that's what you see. And people can see this on our website at ae911truth.org. And so that's slash WTC7. And by the way, if you put slash justice rising, ae911truth.org slash justice rising, you get to the conference at which Dr. Halsey will be appearing live. And if you put slash inquest, you'll come to the page where Matt Campbell, who's also going to be in our, as we mentioned, in our conference, his effort, fascinating story to get justice for his brother's death by submitting a new inquest for a petition for a new inquest into his brother's death. And you can donate also there to Matt Campbell's fund so that we can raise the necessary funds. As barristers, this is one of the top barristers in the world, by the way, with regard to Matt's lawyer in the UK, $500 an hour, and it adds up. But we believe this is a tailor-made opportunity to get this evidence into the court system, and in this case, internationally. It's the first time outside the U.S. for us. So this is a great opportunity, because all we have to show is that a new inquest might change the verdict. Well,
Absolutely.
you can be darn right. It will change the verdict. Not the verdict, that's the wrong term. The inquest results, the original inquest results. So it's a very low threshold that we have to cross. But we do have to raise the funds.
Lots and lots of powerful stuff happening at A&E these days, it seems like, Richard. I mean, we have touched on, we've got Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for the Justice Rising event. For everybody watching and listening to this, I hope you will tune in. We also have the upcoming film that we briefly touched on, 7. And we also talked about Dr. Halsey's study, talking about the barrister's attempt to get justice outside of the U.S. for 9/11.
This is Derrick Broze with Freethinker Radio and the Conscious Resistance Network. You just heard my interview with Richard Gage, the founder of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. He is a registered architect with the American Institute of Architecture. And as he mentioned, tonight, beginning September 11th, running through September 13th, there will be an online conference called 9/11 Justice Rising, which you can find out more on ae911truth.org. Thank you guys so much for listening to Freethinker Radio and for always supporting our efforts. We'll be back with more news, more music next week, and please continue to support KPFT at kpft.org. Until next time, remember, You are powerful. You are beautiful, and you are free.